and welcome to Ethical Leadership, Voices from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast series commissioned by the Pic Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington, and produced by advisory firm Pocket Knife. This podcast series aims to demystify ethics and make ethical leadership a concept we all become more fluent in, and a skill we all become more nimble with. My name is Hélène Mananda, Director of Pocket Knife, and it is my pleasure to host you for this episode of the podcast series. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Pic Picot. Better known as Pic, Pic Picot is the founder and driving force behind Pic's Peanut Butter, a beloved New Zealand brand that has grown from humble beginnings into an international success story. In 2007, at the age of 55, Pic began making peanut butter in his Nelson garage, motivated by a desire to create a healthier, tastier alternative to the overly sweet commercial options available. Welcome, Pic, to our podcast. Today, I'd like to discuss with you the idea of being a moral person, not something we talk about on a daily basis, but what is this idea of being a moral person and a moral leader, and what this may look like through the lens of your personal story of growing Pic's Peanut Butter into a widely successful business that also cares for people and the planet. So I'd love to start with an anecdote that you shared with me previously when we connected ahead of this interview. You said to me that one year on World Car Free Day, you sat, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but you sat by the entrance of your cafe's car park in Nelson and explained to approaching staff and customers that they wouldn't be able to park their cars here on that day for obvious reasons that I'm sure you would have explained to them. And I thought that is such a great metaphor for your leadership style. Would you want to tell us a bit more about why you did this and maybe what responses you got and what impact you think that may have had on people that day?
Right. Well, my major concern these days is for our planet and the urgency of getting stuck in and trying to, halt the heating of the planet and climatic catastrophes, which are just such a violent and unescapable effect that we're causing through our actions. And a couple of years ago, one of our girl at work who's in charge of planet matters came to me and said, well, next month is World Car Free Day, and I think we should give everybody who comes by bicycle or by bus a free cup of coffee. And I said, well, that's a great idea. Let's do that. But let's close the car park. And I thought, this is going to cause awful ructions because we've got a great big car park demanded by the council. If you're going to have a cafe, you need to have, 4,000, well, not 4,000, but like 40 odd car parks out the front. And so they were very popular. We've got a tenant that runs the cafe. And so I burst in on the guiding team's morning meeting and said, I've got a plan. I want to close the car park for World Car Free Day. And the guiding team looked suitably stunned and came up with all the reasons why it couldn't possibly be done, largely because there wasn't enough time and there wasn't enough staff to do it. And so I said, well, I'll do it myself. So we got a couple of planter boxes and put them across the entrance to the car park, and I got myself a plastic chair and sat at the entrance for the day, and any cars that pulled in to come and park, I explained to them that it was World Car Free Day and we're closing the car park today, and if they wish to park, they can go and park on the street. There's parking on the street. And I said, I'm doing this to prevent myself having to super glue myself to the highway, which would cause you immense annoyance. And just about everybody liked the idea and they understood, and they went away and parked on the street, and then they came in. Our cafe owner was really concerned that she wouldn't get any business that day. And so I offered to pay her staff costs if nobody turned up. In the event, I don't think it had any effect on her business. Yeah, I was expecting it. World Car Free Day is not something that I've even noticed in the press at all. And so it comes up every year. I'm not sure of the date this year, but it's something it has never appeared on national news or anything. Hopefully this will help to develop that. And I think that as business has an opportunity to take a lead in climate matters where politicians are unable to do this. But if you're a business owner, I think we can do this. we can accept the risks to our business, that so-called perceived risks to the business of what needs to be done. So I've felt very passionate about the opportunities that business offers to make a difference.
Thank you. And I think that's a fantastic example. It sounds like at the end of the day, the cafe didn't suffer in terms of foot traffic that day, which means people actually accepted your call to action to go and park their car further away. And yet you got the customers coming through. So, I mean, it's like a micro example in a way of what could happen if a business leader was actually taking responsibility and taking action in a way that's slightly provocative. Yes, people received it positively and didn't walk away that particular day. If we take this further to the risk you took that day of scaring people away, do you think it's part of, obviously like ethical leadership and being an ethical leader to actually provoke a little bit? Do you think that provocation should be used in a way as a tool? If I take this example further into more philosophical approach.
Yes, I don't think you can take actions that may be antithetical to the standard way of doing things without provoking people in some way, and so it can be scary. I mean, our marketing department introduced a plastic bottle for that could squeeze, and that really upset me because I was happy to use glass and I was happy to use plastic containers that were made a useful container after they'd washed out the peanut butter. But these things I found really disturbing. And when I stood up in the board meeting and said, I really dislike this product, I felt very much out on a limb. It's a scary effect, very alone. But I think if you're not doing that, I don't think you're making a difference.
So tell me more about this. If we now zoom out in the context and like complexity of running a successful business of the size of yours. I know that Pic's peanut butter is B Corp certified. You have embedded a number of sustainability practices to your operations and your governance. You've just mentioned some, stumbles and blocks along the way, like the introduction of this plastic bottle and how people internally may have different views to yours. How do you navigate this? Of course, like it's not an easy road, but to what extent do you feel like this sort of response from you and or others are values-led? Would you consider your values having been an instrumental part of the success of your business, and that's financially, but also from a sustainability point of view? And do you feel like, people share your values, but it's still a work in progress? Like, how would you describe the success that you got to with still examples like this introduction of the plastic bottle and having people around the leadership table having different views on this?
Right. Well, I think, as the business owner, I could do what I liked pretty much, and I could say what I liked. But those people who may have agreed with me around that board table, they might have agreed to meet with me, but they didn't want to put their necks out because, they're answerable to their superiors in the business. And if those superiors are not agreeing with the standpoint, they are taking a risk, particularly with issues like that. So there is a level of compromise, and I think of having to understand the points of view of people, along the chain. I had experience, within my business in the early days and with a previous business where we had been offered the opportunity to take advantage of an insurance claim and claim a bit more than we were entitled to, or to, get some more business that we could have pretended that this guy had a booking for a boat charter and, he had to cancel. Really disliked. Yeah, in fact, I said we just don't do that. We're not those people. And then, it was hard for the people working for me to think that we're going to lose $5,000 worth of business because we're not prepared just to sort of fill in a form saying this guy had booked a trip with us. But I think they're not even moral questions; they're legal questions. I think you can't run a business without having a solid ethical foundation. You've got to have some standards in some way.
And would you say, because obviously you've now given us like 2 or 3 examples already from within, and you've been in this business for many, many years now, would you say your not just tendency, but it's part of your ethics, whether you realize it initially, now you can, in hindsight, and being a more mature business leader, you know that all these decisions and all these things you've been pushing for come from a place of value, and you've seen people around you not understanding it initially. How do you think you've impacted others around you, like through these years? And I'm thinking about your daughter in particular, who's now at the helm of the business. Can you tell me a little bit about you hopefully have seen your behavior and your narrative and your strength in all of these situations has positively impacted others?
Yeah, well, I think I was lucky enough on the day we closed the car park to have it raining a bit. So I was sitting out there in my plastic chair with a raincoat on. And so people saw that, I wasn't just sort of sitting up in the office and waving my hand and go away, it's closed. And so people saw that as actually, being pretty committed to this issue. And if I was prepared to stand out in the rain, they could walk a few meters in the rain. And then I was also approached by a couple of members of our staff who came up to me afterwards and said, look, that was a really gutsy and inspiring thing to do. So it was really worth it. It was really worth it from that point of view. And also for our customers, I think, who think, oh, well, yes, there is a car park here and I just drive here without thinking about it. And so it just helps to just shift that gauge a little bit.
If we continue on that note of inspiring others, you mentioned to me that you were really committed, and maybe now even more than you are stepping down at Pic's Peanut Butter, to giving back, if I can use that expression, and you may have a better one, that fits your values better, but giving back to the communities and maybe paving the way for the future leaders, in particular in the food industry. Do you want to talk to me a bit more about this and how important?
Okay, so I'm not keen on the term giving back. It all sounds, I'm a good person and here I am giving back and you should be giving back. My concern is, I want to live in a harmonious community. I want to live in a community where I'm not sort of looking over my shoulder thinking, I've got this, and people, who have got nothing are going to be attacking me to get this, whatever it is I have. And so, part of me enjoying my life is to ensure that the people around me are enjoying their lives. And I think that's why I am interested and concerned with doing stuff within the community that's going to make it better for me to live in. So it's sheer self-interest, be assured of that. So, and I think that there are fantastic organisations out there that really need our support. And if we're making a bit of money in the business, that's our opportunity to provide financial support for that. Yeah, so there are a number of organisations that we're very delighted to be looking after that are making a difference and giving us a better place to live in for everybody.
Do you go about this as a moral person? We don't want to think about it this way because it's obviously totally natural for you to be that moral leader, but just thinking about our topic of discussion today. How do you go about, what sort of moral leader are you in that sense? Do you go about supporting other initiatives of ideas that you feel really emotionally drawn to? Or do you have some sort of more rational way of going about it in terms of what it is that you want to support? What does good look like, for the community?
I don't pretend to be rational in the things that I like to support. We're an important sponsor for Big Brothers Big Sisters program in New Zealand, and I had looked after a couple of kids when I was starting the business as a big brother mentor, and I really liked it. And so we're very proud to be associated with them and to assist them with running their head office. And then the other things that I'm involved with, we've got our food factory out the back, which is a not-for-profit that provides space for startup businesses to get their businesses going and give them an environment in which there's a sort of collegial sort of stuff going on. So they're sort of learning from each other, hopefully, and just hanging out together and dealing with the same problems as the people around them, rather than throwing experts at people and saying, do this, do that, and go and study. Because in my youth, I was involved with a big workshop in Parnell in Auckland, and we had a whole lot of little businesses in there doing stuff. And I realised that my time in there, I just learned so much about just the skills I needed to do what I was doing, which was woodwork things, and the nature of different businesses and what worked and what didn't, and the value of teamwork and working together. So that grew out of my desire to have an environment where people are hanging out and doing stuff they're passionate about, which in this case was food, And I also thought it would rub off on the culture at Pix, and so bring in some aspects of entrepreneurialism and innovation that would not otherwise be available to us.
I'll pick up on this in a minute, but before I go there, I wanted to ask you, because your response around it sounds like you're more like driven by your heart as a moral leader. Does it mean there's also an aspect of knowing who you are not as an ethical leader? And is it something that you would say you learn through the years, as in you and anyone really, through the years of getting to know yourself as a moral leader, ethical leader? You know yourself better, therefore you also know what you are not, and what impact may this have on how you work with others?
Well, that was very important to me. So I've had a very, very, very varied career doing all sorts of different things, and I just happen to have been doing the peanut butter for a lot longer than anything else. But I'd always operated pretty much by myself. I'd never been a part of a team, and I'd always felt the whole notion of a team was sort of weird. And when you get a letter from Bob and the team at the garage. Anyway, it was when I started making peanut butter and my eyesight was deteriorating, and I realized that I needed some real support and admin, and I hated or dreaded the end of the month when I had to fill in GST reports and things like that, and I'd delay it as long as I could. And when I realized there were people who delighted in that, who really just took to it, I understood that there are different people with different skills, and I really needed to be working with other people. And when my eyesight was deteriorating, there became a whole lot of stuff that I couldn't do. Even things that I'd really liked doing and thought I was really good at. I thought I was really good at graphic design, and I loved doing that. And then I had to give that up because I could no longer use the software. And I got other people in to do it. And initially, I thought they're not doing it right, but they were doing it their own way, and I had to accept that other people's ways could be just as good. And that was a real breakthrough for me, to understand that there were things that I was not as great at as I thought I was, and there were other people who could do them a lot better. And it allowed me to then start to refine the things that I am good at. So that was a real breakthrough for me, to realize that I wasn't the best person for everything, which I thought I was, running a sole business. Also, my eyesight, I learned to trust people because I'd had to. And I think having to trust people allows us to delegate far more than just thinking, well, I've got to delegate, so I need to, let this person do this. But because I couldn't look over their shoulder and say, where did that $40 go? That sort of thing. And I think people respond to being trusted. They really do. They really do.
Totally. I think that's a really great lesson in, some of the things that you may have known deep down forever, in terms of what does it look like to do the best for the business and the people around you, which you would have done inherently a lot about. Yet there was a moment in life where you didn't have a choice, actually. And for a reason that was external and outside of your control, you had to rethink, even in terms of skill set and sharing of the task and then making decisions. Things changed in a way that wasn't really your plan and was partly out of your control, yet it could have led you to what ethical leadership is about, which is making the best decision for the business. Not to say that the new designer is better skilled than you are, but at the end of the day, would you say you ended up being surrounded by talented people, and that may not have happened if you didn't find yourself in this situation?
That's right. If I had 2020 vision and was able to keep doing all those things that I had been doing, possibly wouldn't have discovered that I do have some sort of unique ability to communicate with people. And I think that was a real blessing to discover that.
Yeah. So, an ethical leader is brave and committed and inspiring, like you said, but also there's something about being accepting sometimes, probably, and changing tack, whether you're in control of it or not, and open-minded.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, going back to what you said before about your experience at the panel workshop when you were more like in the wood work, industry, how do you think that shaped? You mentioned a few things already about the people around you, the sense of companionship, the emotional aspect of it, but also the learning aspect, because it sounded like you were talking about lots of transfer of knowledge and skill sets. How do you think, in hindsight, apart from being a great experience and having learned a lot and having made friends along the way, how did that shape who you are as an ethical leader?
I know that who I am is a reflection of the people I have known and loved and worked with and admired. And I think I've been lucky enough to work with and to know some really inspiring people, or people who have remarkable skills and inspired me. And I feel lucky enough to carry those things on in me. And that gives me the ability to call myself an inspiring leader, because it's not me. It would be just too much of a sort of a burden and a sort of to feel that it came from me. But it comes from those people that I've known and that I've respected. So, I mean, I do a bit of, sort of after dinner speaking, and people come afterwards and say, that was really inspiring. And I'm humbled, totally humbled by that. But it's something I have to do. If I can do this, if I can inspire people, what better could you be doing with your time than doing that? It's not a hey, look at me, I'm inspiring, or look at me, I'm moral, or anything like that. It's hey, just look, I knew these remarkable people, and they gave me these phenomenal insights, and I'd like to keep them rolling on. I need to keep them rolling on because it's a treasure that has been loaned to me.
I think you said to me when we talked before around inspiring others, if you can do it, you have to do it. It's your responsibility, right? So it feels like it is a very important part of who you are. Would you say it's a kind of almost like a new phase of being an ethical leader? It is about offering and sharing. I'm not going to say giving back again. Sharing that treasure, this treasure that you've grown thanks to others, and being able to think about how do you pass it on and how do you share?
Yes, it doesn't make me a great person to have this ability to do this. It just is a reflection of what I have been given from others. But I do think it's really important, and this is it's a gift that doesn't exist unless you pass it on.
Having a positive impact on people requires some really good storytelling as well. And I know you're very humble, but how do you go about this, about making sure that people hear the story?
Well, I mean, my name's on the jar, so and you look at stuff in a supermarket, and it's just stuff. There's stuff there. You don't know what it tastes like unless you eat it regularly, and you know that it's whatever brand. This is Heinz, Mr. Heinz. I've never met Mr. Heinz, but if you meet Mr. Pic, it's something that you have a connection. And the only real connection you can have with the product is via people. If I meet a taxi driver, I'm sitting in a taxi and they've never had the peanut butter, and I get to talking to them about peanut butter, and they get interested, and they'll go off and buy some, and they'll try it, and they'll really like it, and I know they will. But also, whenever peanut butter gets mentioned, I had this guy who makes peanut butter, the guy Pic, he was in my taxi, and he's a good guy. I liked him, because what we're after with customers is for them to give us their money. It's not thank you for your business. It's thank you for your money. And that's the real deal. People say, I love your peanut butter. And I say, oh, well, I love your money. Thank you. And that's the guts of it. You can't be a nervous Nelly about talking about money with your customers, because they're having to fork out their own money to give you. And that's a massive vote of confidence for them, and they deserve to get something really good for it. And so part of it is the food, but part of it is the story. It's that connection with the stuff they're eating. And that's a real part of the value of our product. That's why we have why we have Peanut Butter World. People can come there and we can thank them for coming. We can show them how we make the peanut butter. Most of all, we can say, come into our home, meet some of our people, and thank you very much for your money.
Tell me more about this, because some people may find this controversial, right? Profit is not a dirty word, and in your case, profit is at the core of why you've succeeded, and therefore why you can have such a positive impact on people. Tell me more about this idea of there's no shame in making profit, but maybe you said to me, it's about how you make it and how you use it.
Yeah, I would hate to be driven by profit. I would hate to be driven by the idea of making money. Got to go out and make money, and will this make me money, or will this not make me money? I remember I said to one of our staff members, look, we're making enough money so you can make the odd mistake. So don't worry too much about making mistakes, because we're making a bit of money here. And so don't worry about making mistakes. And I think, going through life, terrified of making mistakes. And I know a lot of businesses, when times get tough, that becomes a real fear. But to have enough so that you can try things and do things is incredibly important. So just to have enough money to spend on mistakes is great, I think.
Let's try and bring this back to this idea of working with ethics and values at the core. it can't always be your driver. How do you, and again, you've given us some examples, but how do you navigate the sometimes competing priorities of profit and doing good? Because some of these mistakes you may be able to, I assume some of these mistakes you may be able to afford. Some of them would have a financial cost.
Well, that could be catastrophic, of course, but it's a matter of balance. I think everything is balance. In political issues, it's all balance. And I'm happy to see New Zealand swinging between National and Labour and just keeping in that sort of middle ground without getting too extreme. And it's the same with business. So sometimes you have to make some tough decisions and stop a bit of sponsorship here and there. And that's been really hard. And I know this with the food factory, because we look for outside sponsorship. And I just don't envy the people that are looking after funds and having to tell people no more. And it's not easy.
What would your advice be, thinking about future leaders, and you've got some around you and you've got some experimenting at the food factory, when they find themselves in a position where they have to make these decisions, and maybe hopefully they will have that freedom to make some mistakes. What's your advice to them in terms of navigating these risks? Do you have some thoughts around, what may they want to think of? What may they want to consider? What have you learned?
I find a little difficult. I mean, we do have a sort of a structure of priorities and things that that the business is guiding sort of a program. I mean, I can't tell you what it is at the moment because it changes all the time. I think that's important to keep revisiting plans like that. But personally, I think care for the planet has to be very high up there, and then care for the community. So it's just a difficult thing for me to answer, but that's.
Well, I mean, I can try and give it a go, because you've said a few things that I think are really important. And through the stories you've shared today, you've talked about, being a brave leader, being a committed leader, an inspiring leader. We've talked about being open-minded as well. And, quite interesting, you've just raised that more structured way of thinking about your priorities. So maybe it's a bit of a mix of both. So you've got the care for community and planet at the heart. You've got your priorities on paper. And then there's a lot into your personality and behavior that you must develop through years of experience, being that committed, brave, inspiring, and sometimes provoking, ethical leader. It seems like it's been working really well for you.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the way the business has developed and the people that we've got in charge of it now that I'm stepping back. So I'm very confident about the peanut butter for the future in the business.
Exactly, in that space of knowing that your legacy is here, and despite the uncertainty of this world and the craziness of this world, you've built something that is solid and resilient with values at its core, and values embedded through, like we said earlier, the organizational structure, the accreditation, B Corp, and some of the governance, approach as well.
I don't know that I can think of much. I mean, there are a lot of things that I've learned from other sort of things along the way, like sailing and managing a vote and being responsible for people's lives. I think that was really, I loved that. I love that responsibility and the requirement to be the guy. I think we're not called captains of industry for nothing. There's so much I learned from sailing across the Pacific that has been very useful in running the business.
Do you think there's a lesson here, for future leaders? Not to say that anyone would have a chance to sail or anyone would have a chance to have a varied career and as varied as yours. But what is the lesson there in terms of, trying to create the conditions for multiple experiences, or what does it look like, you think?
I think it's the idea that as an employer, you're responsible for people's lives, their livelihoods, their families. We've completely lost track of the number of peanut butter babies that have been born. But the first one to two of our staff was such a wonderful thing. We've given this family the security to have children. That's one of the huge privileges of employing people. It's a community thing, and it's a huge responsibility, but it's insanely rewarding. It'd be devastating to have to let people go en masse. It must be very soul destroying.
And I love this, and we should celebrate this as well. The fact that you obviously put people at the core of everything in your thinking, and of course planet as well. But it feels like the human relationship, whether they are with staff or employees or customers or the wider community, are are really important to you?
You know, I think the idea of a business is such a nebulous thing. A business is nothing. It's just people. It's an amalgamation of people. Your customers, your staff, and your family. It's all people. The whole idea of being in business is such a sort of a weird notion that doesn't talk to the main things, which is this community thing that you're leading, really.
Yeah. Sometimes when I talk about social enterprise, I talk about how it's about thinking the way we create value and we trade value.
It is. It's about value, and values is fits in really nicely in there. Value and values.
Yeah, because you create value from, like you said, simply making a good product that people are going to enjoy, but then you create value through relationship and you create values. It's about value and it's about reciprocity there, That is so good because that links value with values. Like you create value to this beautiful product, but also because of what the product is, because of who you are with your name on the jar, you know that if people buy it, somehow there's something there that you have a lot in common, including probably your values. That's really, really heartwarming, actually, the way you approach it with all humility and simplicity in a very positive sense of the word. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure. Thank you for listening. This was an episode of Ethical Leadership, Voices of Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast collection commissioned by the Brian Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington. I hope you enjoyed the episodes as much as I'm enjoying the fabulous conversations with our guest speakers. Stay tuned for more.